Hi, my name is Jesse Grimes. I'm here on behalf of the SDN for our Service Design Day on June 1st. And today I'm joined by Mark Vanderbeeken for a talk in relation to his work on the COVID-19 crisis. Mark reached out to me a couple of months ago to discuss an initiative he had, and we brought it into the SDN Slack group, and that's why we're having our talk today. Mark is CEO and founding partner at Experientia, which is based in Italy and Switzerland, and he's joining me today from Italy. Mark is originally from Belgium and moved via New York and Copenhagen to Italy, where he initially joined the Interaction Design Institute Ivrea, and in 2005 he started Experientia. So I'd like to welcome him again to this talk, a continuation of some discussions we've had on Slack. I'd like to begin, Mark, by asking you what initially triggered your interest in the relationship to this crisis we're currently facing and the service design community.
Well, I mean, we have a service design company, and of course, drastic things happened at the beginning of March here in Italy and many other countries where we started working from home, and we were facing a future where, or we are still facing a future, which is quite uncertain about what that really means in terms of our work, but also our societies and our communities. And at that time, I thought that everybody was sort of, in a way, flabbergasted by what was happening around them, but nobody really was paying much attention. I mean, there was a lot of attention being paid to the healthcare system and the fact that people had to work from home and how that would affect the economy. And these are, of course, still big topics at the moment. But at that time, there was really very little attention being paid to what kind of society would come out of all this. I mean, it was assumed that, sort of naively, I guess, that after a while we would return to normal and things would just fall back. And then after some time, people started realizing that was not really the case. And also I thought that we as service designers have a particular skill set that is really relevant to helping not only scout what that future might mean using human-centered design methods, research, I mean, qualitative research, ethnography, observation, and so forth, and modeling and scenario developing, but actually also making some future possible, looking at opportunities to actually intervene. We are not just forecasters, we are also designers. We design futures and we make them happen. I mean, we're makers of future environments in a way. And I thought that we as service designers could have a role to play in envisioning that future and making it happen. And so that's why I started thinking, well, what is it that we can really do concretely that nobody else is doing? And so that's how it came about, really. And that's how I started thinking about this project, which is still a project in its, we shall say, quite embryonic phase, but I think it has potential to grow into something really important.
Okay, now, actually, I was, as part of my first kind of getting to understand where you were going, I was reading the blog posts that you were putting on the Experientia website, and I could see that you were interested in a lot of different ramifications of this crisis, both ones for society, for the economy, for the environment, and you had picked a lot of different views of people who were somehow working to define our future, and I think you even found some of those directions were more positive or less positive. So yeah. What were your observations of what people are doing and what these directions might be?
Well, yes. I mean, I think it evolved a little bit over the 2 months since I initiated with this idea. But I think there's still some main lines, main directions that the current thought is going into. I mean, there is a mainly economic analysis, which is the dominant one that you read in the newspaper, and it's all about how to quickly return to normal. And now that's called new normal. That's the latest development, but it's still, how to return to this new normal. The second one is some foresight exercises that done by Deloitte and by Accenture and by economists, and that look at possible economic and sometimes even geopolitical future scenarios that are often structured in 4 quadrants. So you have 2 axes and 1 axis. You have a high and a low, low and a high on the one axis and low and a high on the other axis, and then you have 4 quadrants. And you can say, okay, what is the low-low scenario and the high-high scenario and the ones in the middle. And that's very popular, but they are often structured, again, on economic and geopolitical matters. Then there are increasingly a number of what I would call dystopian or nearly dystopian popular media analyses on how this crisis will strengthen big tech, how it will strengthen surveillance, how it will kill small businesses, how it will kill city centers. They are worrisome and tend to have a kind of quite negative slant to them. And it's hard to really understand if that negative slant is justified or not. I mean, whether, for instance, talking about the city centers, if the city centers get a little bit less attention over time, but attention grows to the more, the peripheries of the cities, is this necessarily a bad thing? Question mark, I don't know. And so it could also be that local communities become more strengthened. And I was just talking this morning with a, I shall say, a person who looks at the future professionally for a government organization. And he was saying that there are now these in-between spaces. I mean, usually people who lived outside of the center, they had their home environment in which they did home things and perhaps a bit sports and social activities. And then they had the city center where they worked. And but now that they can't go to the city center so easily anymore, there's this opportunity to create these in-between spaces, these spaces that sit in the outside of the center. Then there's visions of an alternative world, and these come also from writers, from thinkers, also from journalists, looking at what could be more sustainable, more local, more community-based, and more socially rewarding futures. And a lot of that has also, quite a few of those visions of the future, of the post-COVID-19 future, have either architectural urbanism angle or are focused on changes in mobility. I mean, if we can't be going into the metro with so many people anymore, and we can't put in that many cars extra on the road because it will just lead to traffic jams, then we have to think about bicycles, we have to think about all these other mechanisms. And then there are finally some more academic studies on what will likely remain and will not remain from this pandemic, and what the factors are that make behaviors stick over time or make people go back to the good old ways of doing things. And what this kind of psychological and cultural and social impact of COVID, what we can actually say that the psychological, cultural, and social impact of COVID-19 is going to be in that context. So I think we are now approaching this broader social debate on what could constitute a desirable future. And this is now getting started. People are slowly getting back to work, getting back to the city centers, but don't necessarily want to go back to this rhythm that they had before. So they're debating about this. I mean, people definitely appreciated also elements of this different way of living. And so I think we now have an opportunity to start creating this kind of new, better world, or we could also slide into something much worse. I mean, if local businesses start closing massively, there are high stakes at the moment. And I thought that Timothy Garton-Ash summarized that quite well in a recent article that I will share with you. So service designers, I thought, have written a lot about methodology. I've seen, I mean, they have many companies, many consultancies have expressed their point of view of how they have adapted themselves to this situation of lockdown, how they can work in, or how they propose to work in this new environment. This has not always been so successfully. I also read today on Nesta, the British Foundation website, that many research companies have had a very drastic decline in their turnover, in their invoicing. And I also thought that relatively few articles have come out and relatively few contributions have come forward that discuss the specific contribution that service designers can make as practitioners. And because we are not just methodological experts, we are also practitioners, we also intervene. And I thought that there was one in particular that stood out. I highlighted a few of those, but writing, I think, is not enough. We are a future-based community. We are practitioners, and we help define these future challenges, not just report them. So we can understand desirable future, we can imagine them, we can design them, and we can implement them and scale them. And so that's a bit the reason for this initiative. I mean, there's still very little being done by service designers that, and I understand, I mean, it's also fairly recent phenomenon, but I think it's now the opportunity to really make some change happen.
And how would you envisage that? So if we're in a position, you say that we're a forward-thinking discipline, and hopefully we can be in positions to make that change. What would it look like? What would our roles be? And if there are not people that are carrying our job title or take our toolkit of techniques to their work, who are they? What could this look like?
Well, I think there's a double answer to your question. The first one is, what can we all do? And the second is, what can this project do? I think what we can all do, and particularly if you're having a consultancy role, or if you're working for a big company, but are thrown into this new environment of working remotely, is accept that this new normal is going to be very different, and so tackle the beast head on, and just say, okay, things are changing, and that is, I mean, fine or not, we cannot ignore that. And so what we've done in our company is gone to some clients that, and we actually obtained some projects that way, by saying, okay, what you need to do is understand this new environment that we are facing now. Because you will have to rethink your services, you will have to rethink your offering. You cannot just say, okay, this is a parenthesis, and then we go back and we can just put in these 2019 services into the latter half of 2020 and so on. No, you will have to rethink the service offering you make. And in order to do that, you first have to understand the conditions that people are working in, are living in, and what their requirements are, which are very different if you work from home. And we will continue to work, I would not say exclusively from home, which is not the case, but there will be home work prevalence for months to come, and probably for more than a year to come. And so it makes sense to start thinking about new services, and especially now that people are so used and have also set up their living environments in order to do this work from home. I think 100% office environment is never going to come back. I mean, for particular workers who have a particular, shall I say, requirements about a physical space, who work in a restaurant, who work in a factory, of course, that is going to continue. But if you're an office worker, that the world is going to change dramatically, and it will last. I mean, I'm now trying to open our office, on the 15th of June, and I'm realizing that most people actually want to continue working from home, and so it's.
I heard that actually several weeks ago. Twitter said that, look, we have no date to come back to the office. Our operations can go on from everyone working from home from now on.
Yeah, I mean that's true too. But I didn't want to force people. I just asked them. I mean, we now setting this office that people can work there, and there are entire teams that say, okay, but we're fine. You can just work from our home. And I'm like, okay. So that really changes a lot of dynamics, and so that's sort of the answer to what we can do is to what we all can do is to really approach the challenge head on, and don't think that this is just a parenthesis, a little blip in and then we return to normal. Things are going to change, and clients want to know that.
Yep. And I found it interesting that you say you have some clients who realized that there was an existential reason they had to change. They couldn't just say the services we were either had in the market or we were going to develop at the end of last year will be the same at the end of this year. Can you give any advice, or can you say what characterizes these companies that make them so open for such change, and how you might, if you're a service designer looking to create the new work as you have, how you might get them to see that?
Okay, so yeah, we're working with the telco now, which I can't name, of course, and they were looking at small business owners and they wanted us to look at small business owners and people working from their small home office and so on. When we were writing the proposal in January, coronavirus was still mainly Chinese, and so we were saying, what would that mean if it would come here? So that we put a slide, we put in a paragraph, more than a paragraph, we put in a page on what new practices might be and how things could evolve. I think it was also February we were writing this, and they liked it. I mean, when they were evaluating the proposal, they said, let's go for that, let's look at that. What we're now seeing is that the people do a lot of work in their homes, and that, I mean, if you make a contract with a telco for your mobile or for your home internet, you realize that you have to choose between your private customer or your business customer. Well, that distinction is actually not there anymore. I mean, we are now all business customers in private, or all private customers who do business. And this has a lot of implications, and for instance, on security and tech support, and these worlds are now merging, and therefore, and people will need new services that telcos could provide. Now, what these services might be, that's the scope of this research and this project we're doing, but the point is that it was not because this company was particularly illuminated or more illuminated than, I mean, they are, but they're not more illuminated, I would say, than other big telcos. I think what they saw is that there is a new, shall I say, certain phenomena that were taking place before have been accelerated. And so they have to move faster in that direction of rethinking some services.
Yeah, I can imagine too that the industries that are used to dealing with competition and needing to be agile are going to be the ones that will be also quicker to adapt in these situations.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually, as the SDN, recently did a global survey in our community and to look at what the impact of the coronavirus was on service design practitioners.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we learned was that nearly 70, and you just hinted about this in the Nestor research, nearly 70% of our respondents said that their organizations were either negatively or very negatively impacted. What opportunities do you see for practitioners to either readapt themselves, refocus themselves, find new target markets? Is there some positivity that can be found in how this is forcing people to refocus their work in some way?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, people will need to tackle the beast head on and just be much more. Don't be too timid about it. I mean, clients or potential clients are facing this really seriously. And so you cannot afford to say, okay, yes, I really want to talk about that, but perhaps they're not interested. They are interested. And so go for it. I mean, don't be scared to mention that. That is the first recommendation I would give is to do it that way. The other, I mean, the things that we've done is also we've set up a number of we're doing a few government or European Union projects which are really about community building, which is a topic which is very relevant and very I shall say topical at the moment. People talk about it a lot. It's challenging, of course, in these moments. I mean, one is about health in cities. The other one is about security in the evening in cities. We try to bring learnings from that into the broader, also into the private sector and into the other projects that we're working on. To the people who don't see that opportunity in the companies that they're working for, there are also non-professional paths that you can go into and to bring value to your community. I mean, I'm personally, for instance, quite active on a political level, but not nationally, but locally, because we have municipal elections coming up next year. And I can see that there is a lot of need for the kind of, I shall say, design thinking or design approaches that service designers can bring. When we were discussing this before, Jesse, we were talking about the fact that in government, we don't really have service designers. And I think that is true, but on the other hand, we also have a lot of people who do work a lot with local communities in governments, particularly in local governments. They are used to work with social communities, cultural communities, health communities, immigrant communities, and so forth. So they have a portfolio of methods that they have used over the years and have given value to them. They know also their communities really well. And I think we can, as service designers, we first have to appreciate we can't really impose our methods without understanding that first that what they have is really already quite valuable. And secondly, we can add this methodology on top of that so that we can learn from them about how they have been doing things in the past, but we can also contribute to that. Now, what is nice is that with the Zoom and Google Meets and so on, is that it becomes in a way easier to participate in all these meetings. And so I have lots of evening meetings now where we contribute with our ideas, and I'm so often the only service designer, although I'm not professionally trained as a service designer, but the only person who works in a service design company who is present at these meetings. But people really need that. People are asking for service design. People are asking for, well, if our services have to become so digital, we also have to start thinking about the user experience of services. This is engineers who say this, healthcare workers who say this, politicians who say this, and then they ask, but you work in user experience, how do you do that? And it becomes interesting then to have this kind of conversation, which you would never have if you were not engaged in these kind of civic initiatives. So don't be afraid if you can't find an outlet in your company or in your professional environment, to also look a little bit at these opportunities that are now opening up. There is a lot of need for civic co-creation, I would say.
Yeah. Now, if I can kind of make a funny adaptation of the quote, you said that there's not a lot of service designers in government. I think there's a lot of service designers in government, but they're just not evenly distributed. At what to address?
Gibson.
Yeah, exactly. It's Gibson and future thinking, but for where we are. The UK, of course, is a great example of service design being well distributed through government, but
yes,
perhaps not so much in Italy. So to take that question of kind of scale and involvement, there will be a lot of people who are watching us who are working as service designers in banks who, like you, want some role in designing a new and a better future coming out of this. You just hinted at that there are local initiatives. How might they find them, and what might they expect to do, or is it something that they should try to initiate themselves?
I mean, of course, contexts are very different from one city to another. I mean, there are always local pages in newspapers, and you can find initiatives there that are written up upon. I mean, don't be afraid to reach out to them. And there are lots of initiatives that are membership-based or volunteer-based. If there are, indeed, as is the case in my city, there are elections coming up, there is a need to reach out beyond political parties and civic initiatives. I would say that at the moment with this, I see a lot in the Italian newspapers and also in the Belgian newspapers, because I'm also Belgian, written up on these kind of initiatives. And so I presume that the same applies to other countries, that if you just follow a little bit what is going on, it becomes quite easy to find out where interesting developments are taking place, which are membership-based organizations, which you feel an affinity with. I mean, it's the cost of going to one or two meetings. I mean, attending one or two meetings via a video call is so low at the moment. You don't even have to leave your house. You can see who is participating. You can see the debate and the conversations, and then you can make an assessment of whether these organizations would deserve your time, basically, and your time would be valuable to them. So yes, I would try out a few and see what works.
And I think in the context of the SDN, of course, we have a big community with lots of 45, 46 chapters around the world, yes. And also Slack, where I've seen also the grassroots of people getting together and having these discussions. So I think that might be a starting point. So I'd like to then move it on a bit. You've suggested in the beginning through the Slack channel that we've created the outlines of a project. Can you share with me a bit more about how you'd like to move it forward and what that could look like, and even more particularly how people can get engaged in it who are interested in joining this with you?
Yeah, I mean, the project, as I envision it, we basically run in 3 phases, and it's just a draft at the moment. I mean, I'm more than willing to change it. It's just an idea of how a project could potentially be set up. So the first phase would be a phase of assessment of what research has been done, and there has been actually, and this is perhaps also something I didn't mention in the beginning, But one of the reasons why I started with this is also that in a number of service design networks that I'm part of, yours, but also others like the one related to the Polytechnic University of Milan, scenario development has been very much part of how foresight planning has been done. I mean, what are the communities that we want to create in Europe, for instance, by 2030, 2040, even later than that, and how can we make these communities happen? How can we think about new modes of transport, new modes of mobility, new modes of food creation, food production, and food consumption, and so forth. And I've been part of these of these conversations and of these exercises, these workshops with them. And so one of the reasons that I thought that we have a unique contribution to make is that we understand this scenario development really well. So I thought the first phase could be one of scenario development, looking at what has been done in the past, looking at scenarios that have been developed for 2030, 2040, see which can be not brought back to 2021, let's say, or extrapolated to 2021, and what are the environmental, social, psychological, political dynamics that we have to take into account. So what are scenarios that would make sense for this near future? And this could be done through desk research, could be done through expert interviews, and through this elaboration of pre-COVID-19 scenarios. So, and I was thinking that two topics are very crucial at the moment, and these should be very much central to this exercise. One is work. People have lost a lot of work. So how do you create new work? What is this new work? And the other one is education. I mean, people are not at school at the moment, or often not at school at the moment, and how to set up education, which is also partly, or which will need to be partly remote, and what are the challenges for that. The second phase would then be more one of participation. So we have these draft scenarios, and then we have to validate them. We have to make sure that they make sense, that they are indeed what is going to happen, which are the ones which are more or less desirable, which are, so it's really about creating a discussion about these scenarios. And there I would say that we need very good communication, excellent video material, animations, imaginations of how that future would be, so that really a debate can take place that is way beyond the service design community, that would be in the newspapers, would be in magazine, perhaps be on TV in a program where you could really talk about this and people could discuss this. And I think that is a value in itself, that people, as I was saying before, people are now starting to discuss this upcoming future and have also tasted certain things that they value. And so how can we make that, how can we make people think more about this desirable future? And the last one is then a micro implementation phase. I mean, let's pick 2, 3, 4 elements of these scenarios, and let's see if we can't implement them specifically in a neighborhood, in a village, in a community, and then see what is required to scale them and to build them up. And again, these experimental projects would need to be very well communicated, so that people can actually say, okay, well, it's not just that they talk about it, but they actually have done it. And I think the thing that happened with this pandemic is that a lot of things that a year ago would have seemed wildly futuristic, to move most of our jobs to homes, has actually been done without huge. I mean, there was definitely friction. Friction in terms of technology that people don't have, or friction about inequality and so on. But without the, it was not such a huge adaptation as would have been assumed just a year ago, or half a year ago even. And so I think people have realized that the future is more makeable than we were led to believe. And it's up to us to make it. I mean, it's really up to us to decide what kind of future we want to make. And I think there we have an opportunity now, before we go back to this new old normal, to build on that and say, okay, you know, you've tasted it. Let's try to really make something that is not just you know, falling back in the good old ways with some homeworking added to it. I mean, let's see what we can really do. And I think that that is what got me, what I would like to be working on. You asked me also what is next. I mean, I think what is next now is I would like to find some as jokingly said, some partners in crime. So people who can work with us and with me on making this idea, which is at the moment just a few pages that several pages that I've written, but that can be developed further into an actual proposal. Who can help me structure this? And secondly, who can also, who have some inroads or some connections with potential funders. I mean, this is not going to be a hugely expensive project, but some funding will be required to do it. And so in order to make some change happen, we need also a little bit of funding to get going with this, because otherwise we are, each of us taken by, especially since agencies are not always in such a good shape, the survival mode kicks in, and nobody has time anymore to focus on that.
Yeah, okay. And just to be clear, I can see this as being relevant, and I've seen the initial kind of interactions within the Slack channel. This is open to people in our community from around the world, right?
It is open to communities from around the world, and I've seen also a lot of people from South Africa, from Brazil, from Mexico, contributing, and we'll have to think about a little bit how we're going to do this, also particularly in terms of funding. If we go for a more global project, then we would have to find some kind of foundation that would work with us on this. If it's a more European project, and I have to say, for now, I've been mostly, in terms of funded projects, I've only been mostly involved in European funded projects. Then we would need to find either a foundation or an entity related to the European Commission, or that could take it forward. So I'm open to both ideas, and I don't necessarily want to block one or prefer one against the other. I think it also depends a little bit on the strength and of the human power that now comes forward, and that people will, if people have, you know, there's somebody excellent in I don't know, in Mexico, who has really good ideas or has really good connections, let's do it that way. If we have somebody in Brussels, it's another way. It really depends on how this evolves, and it may also evolve that people just say, okay, this is great. I have this opportunity in Australia to take it forward with my Australian government, and I do it in Australia, just there. Fine. Then, I mean, there's no copyright on this idea. I don't claim that it should be done within the service design network with us. You know, it's an idea that can be taken forward also independently. So run with it if you want, but keep us informed. That I'm asking in a good creative comment. comments scenario, that Creative Commons scenario, that if you take the idea, fine, but keep us informed.
Sure. Well, I would say we should try to harness the interest of anyone who's watched this and get them to participate directly. So if you go to the SDN Slack workspace, we've set up a special project channel where you can join. There's a link in there to Mark's Google document, which also has really his outline and his vision there. So if this has triggered your interest, if you'd like to play a part in that, I'd like you to be in that Slack channel and interacting with Mark. So unless, Mark, you have anything else to share, I think this has been great, and I hope it can kind of attract new and interested people to your initiative, and here's to a better designed and a better service designed future.
Great. I hope a lot of people will take a look, and that some people will decide to join this this initiative. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
And thanks a lot to the Service Design Network for hosting this as well. This is fantastic.
Okay, great. Goodbye. Nice to talk.
Goodbye, everybody.